Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, April 29th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I'll begin with some huge news in my house. This is actually something we discussed on the pod. I don't think it ended up in the audio cut of the pod, but we included it on Instagram yesterday. On Sunday, my 18-month-old daughter, Olivia's favorite doll, went missing on a trip to the park. She calls her baby. She had difficulty going to bed Sunday night. Well, we had a miracle on Monday. Baby was found in the park. Baby is back. There's been a reunion. And I just want everyone to know that sometimes there's good news on this podcast.
How did that happen?
Olivia went back to the same park yesterday with her nanny. And sitting there on a park bench was Baby.
I can't believe it.
Apparently slept in the park overnight. No major damage to Baby. She's been cleaned up and given a new outfit, and the reunion happened after the nap.
Well, Baby might have some psychological damage from being left in the park, but Olivia has never slept better.
Olivia's back, and I've gotten so much reaction on Instagram. Rest assured, we now have several babies that we bought overnight, hoping to replace original Baby when we thought Baby was lost forever. And we will start to, per your guidance, start to rotate them through so they all have the same feel over time.
Right, because Olivia was crying because she couldn't sleep because Baby was missing, and that interrupted our recording of Monday's podcast. And then you and I offline, but while we were still rolling, started to talk about it, and you posted that clip to Instagram. The one thing that I had said to you, and a few people messaged me as well, you should definitely read Knuffle Bunny by Mo Willems.
Oh, yeah. I got that suggestion like several dozen times. It's a 3-part series. I'm told that the third one makes you cry. Yes, we've also ordered the book. I think, is it not Knuffle Bunny? Is it a silent K?
I think it's a choose your own adventure. Is there a right way? I do the silent K.
It's a series about losing your buddy. So anyway, I think it's probably a good lesson nonetheless. At some point she will lose something that may not be recovered. And so we are very lucky this go around that, again, poor little Baby. If Baby could talk about what she saw overnight on a park bench in New York City, boy, the story she could tell.
We would interview her on the interview podcast.
Maybe it's a subject of a children's book of a doll that's left on a park bench in New York overnight and what that doll goes through.
That's actually a great idea.
Hey, one of Olivia's favorite books is Corduroy. Another adventure overnight when everyone's looking. So.
All right, let's get to some headlines here. Canadians went to the polls Monday. What we know about the results, about who will be the country's next prime minister after an election that was dominated by President Trump. Today also marks Trump's 100th day in office, what he's done, what he hasn't done, and how it's being received as the administration announced its latest move to tackle its biggest issue, illegal immigration. Widespread power outages causing major blackouts and massive disruptions for tens of millions of people in Spain, France, and Portugal.
Yeah, a number of you in the Mo News community stuck in various places in Spain and Portugal, and you sent us notes.
Russian President Vladimir Putin announces a 3-day ceasefire in May, but can he stick to it? A big mistake on a U.S. aircraft carrier. An F-18 fighter jet rolled off the side of the ship and sank to the bottom of the sea. What we know and what it's going to cost the government, aka the taxpayers.
Yeah, how much of your taxpayer dollars went down to the bottom of the Red Sea?
Some media news following last week's resignation of the executive producer of 60 Minutes, what a correspondent on the show had to say during Sunday night's broadcast. And some concern over Meta's digital companions, aka AI robots, that will talk sex with teens. Even some people inside the company are concerned. And finally, the 50th Harvard Youth Poll finds a generation on edge, concerned about finances and fitting in. And Moshe has On This Day in History.
One of our favorite stories for On This Day in History, the story behind Aretha Franklin's Respect. I get to tell it once a year, Jill, so one of my faves.
All right, Canadians voted Monday in a deeply consequential election to determine the future of the country. It is an election that has partially been dominated by President Trump's threats to Canada and the trade war. Pre-election opinion surveys showed that the Liberal Party, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, had a slight advantage over the Conservative Party and its leader, Pierre Poilievre, as voters headed to the polls. Moshe, do we have any results yet?
Jill, we do. As of about midnight Eastern time, Monday night, the projections from all the major Canadian TV networks is that Canada has voted to keep the Liberal Party in charge for yet another term after a very chaotic few months up here. Prime Minister Mark Carney officially elected to a full term here as Liberals won their fourth straight election on Monday. Now, this is not an altogether surprising result. We have told you that this was expected based on some of the polling data that we've seen in recent weeks here. Some background on Carney. He is the former head of the Bank of Canada and the former head of the Bank of England. So he is a very experienced central banker, very experienced economist. He is 60 years old, and he replaced a very deeply unpopular Justin Trudeau earlier this year. Remember, Trudeau had won several terms as a Liberal leader. He was hoping to win again. His father had served multiple terms as prime minister. He was hoping to outpace his father, though Trudeau had become very unpopular in recent years. Some of the same issues we face in the US in terms of cost of living, the experience with COVID, inflation, and the feeling in Canada that change had to happen. Well, some major events over the course of the past few months allowed Liberals to stay in power here and win this election. Number one, Trudeau resigned as prime minister. He saw the writing on the wall. Members of his own party were calling for him to go. And so basically he resigned and gave the Liberal Party a chance to elect a new leader. That's Mark Carney. He took over as prime minister, and then the country went to elections. He is a dedicated centrist. He spent a lifetime in very powerful circles there as a central banker and is seen as somebody that can really help the Canadian economy. Beyond Trudeau's resignation, the other major shift, Donald Trump. As of a few months ago, if you looked at the polls, Conservatives were leading by upwards of 20 points. It looked like they were going to blow things out, and Liberals had no shot after nearly a decade in power here. But of course, Trudeau resigns, gives Carney a shot, and that is when Trump is elected, takes power, and launches this trade war against Canada. Canadians, I've spoken to a number of them, say they've never seen the country as patriotic as it is right now. They very much took offense at what Trump was doing, not just the tariffs, but the constant threats to sovereignty, the constant nearly daily drumbeat from him that he's going to annex Canada, he's going to make Canada the 51st state. Canadians very concerned about that and looking for someone who's going to fight Trump. And they didn't see that in the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. Again, he was leading. He said he had solutions when it came to inflation and other issues, and Canada needed to change. Well, with Trump on the scene, the feeling among an increasing number of Canadian voters was they need a fighter who's going to challenge Trump and not a fellow conservative, a fellow populist that may be similar in some ways to Trump. Now, one thing to keep in mind here when it comes to Canada, Canada is not a two-party system. It's not just Democrats and Republicans. It's not just, at least in Canada, liberals and conservatives. There are parties like the New Democratic Party, the Green Party. There's a party from the Quebec province called Bloc Québécois. It's a unique party, but has probably looks like a couple dozen seats in the next parliament here. And what we saw in this election, at least based on the data we're seeing so far, is that third-party voters, a number of them moved over to vote for the Liberals here. Because, again, they saw the threat of Trump. So the New Democrats in particular were a stronger party in previous elections. A number of their voters moved to the Liberal Party here to help put Carney over the edge. Now, while the Liberal Party will have the most seats in Parliament, they will not have a majority in Parliament, which means they'll have to work with some of these other parties to get things done. It appears to be a narrow victory here for the Liberals. So they did pull it out, but not an overwhelming victory of any sort. That means that the job will be cut out for Mark Carney as he attempts to pass through his policies. He's going to have to work with some of the other parties here. And, ultimately, if they face more issues, this could mean that we enter an era here in Canada where they have an election sooner than later again, if things fall apart. Nonetheless, the Liberals have the most seats in Parliament, but not a massive majority. And so a number of Canadian political analysts noting that while the Liberals can celebrate, they came back from a huge deficit just a few months ago when they were being completely written off, that this isn't a mandate of any sort. At least some of the analysts are saying, be cautious, Mark Carney. Jill, as we were watching this election unfold and voting finally happen on Monday, Trump chimed in yet again on Monday morning with his advice for Canadian voters, saying, elect the man who has the strength to help Canada become the cherished 51st state of the United States. Folks around Carney called it a final gift from Trump. Again, ironic because Carney is a liberal and more critical of Trump. And yet all these moves by Trump, the constant chit chat of 51st state, 51st state, is highly offensive, highly threatening to Canadians. And they felt, we can't risk it with a fellow conservative. We have to go with the Liberal Party yet again, despite concerns among some Canadians that, it was time for a change. And maybe the Liberal Party wasn't best on all issues, but on the biggest issue they're facing right now, what's happening south of the border, they put Carney and the Liberals in charge again. We'll continue to monitor what happens next and what this means for the relationship, but fascinating developments out of Canada.
All right, now to a big milestone. It is officially the 100th day of President Trump's second term, a time to reflect on which of the campaign promises he's implemented, how it's going, and what people think about the results. Trump signed about 140 executive orders during his first few months in office, nearly 40 on his first day alone, officially surpassing the previous record of 99 executive orders. Moshe, any guesses which president did that?
Jill, it has to be FDR.
Ding, ding, ding. You are correct. President Trump capped it off by signing 2 more executive orders on Monday evening. Both are part of his administration's efforts to crack down on illegal immigration. The first is meant to, quote, unleash America's law enforcement to pursue criminals. That's according to the White House press secretary. The other is aimed at identifying sanctuary cities. Those are cities or jurisdictions that have policies that limit the local government's authority to share information with federal immigration officers. The signing was designed to usher in Trump's 100th day, as the administration is touting immigration as one of the areas in which the president has accomplished his most important campaign goal, and even overperformed. As part of that messaging, the White House is displaying around 100 mugshot-style posters of recently arrested migrants accused of serious crimes, with both names and charges released in a press release. The posters were placed along the White House driveway and high-visibility media areas.
Yeah, if you know that kind of iconic shot that most of the reporters have looking at the camera with the White House behind them, they call that Pebble Beach informally, because they used to have a bunch of pebbles. There's no pebbles there anymore. Nonetheless, it's a whole row of cameras, and intentionally the White House put all these signs of some of the criminal illegals who've been here behind them. So no matter what a reporter is talking about, no matter what network they're on, you have that in the backdrop.
Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, claimed Monday that stricter border and deportation policies have led to nearly 140,000 illegal immigrants being deported since President Trump took office, most of them coming from within the United States rather than just turned away at the border. Under Trump, the number of people trying to cross illegally into the United States from Mexico has taken a serious drop since President Biden's leadership, from a high of nearly 250,000 in December of 2023 to 47,000 in December of 2024 after Trump won the election. And by March of this year, there were about 7,000 apprehensions at the border, which is a record low. Early on in his administration, the numbers were lower day by day. They have gone up since then, but they still haven't reached levels during some of the worst of the migrant crisis during Biden's administration or the numbers seen under President Obama. That being said, the Trump administration's deportations have been also making some headlines because of their extraordinary nature. Last week, 3 young children who are U.S. citizens were deported with their mothers, who were undocumented. The administration says the mothers chose to bring their children with them back to their home country, but critics worry that they may have been pressured. There are some legal cases we're watching related to that. And then there was the story over the weekend about more than 100 undocumented immigrants arrested in a nightclub in Colorado Springs. The Trump administration accused them of being connected to Latin American gangs. This was the first big mass deportation effort that we have heard of during Trump's second term. And there is still fallout from that story we told you about yesterday, the Wisconsin judge who was arrested by the FBI over allegedly helping an undocumented immigrant evade ICE arrest.
So this was the issue, along with the price of everything that Trump believes got him elected. And if you look at the numbers, that bears that out. We'll get to the economy here in a second. But as far as immigration is concerned, the administration is very proud of what it has accomplished, that it's taken the numbers from hundreds of thousands coming across the border to now, you mentioned, Jill, 7,000. I think it's even less than that in April. And so apprehensions at the border are down because less people are coming across the border. Deportations of people in gangs, criminals, etc., up here. And if you look at the polls, including a recent one from CBS last week, 64% of Americans agree that Trump's policies have reduced border crossings. 56% of Americans approve of the approach Trump has taken to deport people who are undocumented here. And so Trump says he's implementing the plan. This is what he promised. But at the same time, there are concerns about overreach. In particular, the issue we've brought up related to due process. And several of these cases have gone to the Supreme Court. For the Supreme Court say, hey, the Alien Deportation Act you're using from 1798, you still have to take those people through a judge. And remember, there were several hundred sent to that prison in El Salvador who never went through a judge. So several of those cases continue to be debated, to be contested through the courts. And so there are even people who are allies of the Trump administration who say, you guys are accomplishing your goal. There's no need to be, overly aggressive here, especially when it comes to something like due process. And you do see some of these headlines related to, U.S. citizens, in this case, U.S. citizen children being sent abroad. Now, this is a unique circumstance because the parents happen to be undocumented, the kids born here. And remember, in the first Trump administration got a lot of backlash for separating families. In this case, what they say is we're keeping the families together. And this was the request of the parents. Nonetheless, there are legal cases related to that as well.
Moshe, I was listening to an interview with Tom Homan, the border czar, and his argument was that the message to undocumented migrants is that having a child in the United States who is technically a citizen is not enough to protect you. It doesn't make crossing the border illegally legal. So that's sort of his message, very matter-of-factly.
Yeah. We'll see ultimately in one of the cases, the father is here trying to get the U.S. citizen child back. Again, we've seen so many cases related to the immigration actions here. And there was, an initial vow by the administration to only focus on criminals. In this case, we have seen non-criminal illegals also deported here. And there have been some various experiments in terms of using U.S. military aircraft, trying out Gitmo at one point. There were questions there as far as logistics, cost, legality. So I think on the whole here, the administration feels good about their actions. We were there at the White House a few weeks ago where they said, this is what we've been put in office to do. And in some cases, a number of cases, it means that they're going up against judges here, calling for the impeachment of judges who don't agree with their actions. So it has been a very aggressive stance, but one that they stand by, but at the same time, one that has a lot of Democrats and civil libertarians concerned. As part of that, too, was the picking up of hundreds of students on college campuses on visa violations, having their visas revoked under this 1950s law that allows the Secretary of State to kick people out who are hurting U.S. foreign policy. There was a legal proceeding on Friday. The administration backtracked on a number of those cases and says that they will continue to pursue that law, but it appears they're not sure whether they have the goods on all of these students. So there's an aspect of that we'll be watching as well. One of the issues the administration faces in terms of pursuing its goals, which is why it's going some of these more extraordinary tactics, is that right now there's a lack of judges and there's a backlog of about 3.5 million immigration cases that are currently pending. 3.5 million cases. Some of these cases aren't heard for years with undocumented migrants still in the country. And so until they get a massive new budget and they are able to hire a bunch of new judges or change procedures there, that is why they're trying some of these tactics that, again, they're facing legal issues on.
Now to the polls. How do Americans think that President Trump is doing? Well, his approval rating after 100 days is actually the lowest in modern presidential history at 39%, according to various sources. If you get down to the details, it is his handling of the economy and tariffs that are really contributing to those low numbers. Polls from CBS show that Americans think the president is focusing too much on putting tariffs in place and too little on lowering prices. 53% say they think the U.S. economy is getting worse, although among self-identified MAGA Republicans, 70% say they think the economy is getting better. Overall, 48% who took that poll think that Trump's economic policies are making them financially worse off. During the past few months, stocks have tanked, in some cases 10 to 20%, in some cases at correction levels. So clearly that's also having an impact on how Americans are feeling. And the irony, of course, is that one of the issues that President Trump had always polled really well on was the economy.
Right, cost of living, because Biden was late to the game on inflation. It's one of the reasons why Trump won. He promised that he would focus on lowering the prices of things. Now, Trump claims that technically, over time, he believes that his major tariff policy will lead to that. But he has acknowledged, and this really happened in these first 100 days, that ultimately there will be some short-term pain. Ultimately, he's not that concerned with what's happening in the stock market. At the same time, there are a lot of Americans who are very concerned about it because increasingly your 401k plan is there. And so a lot of Americans have been focused on, especially if you're retired or near retirement. And that speaks to a lot of the concern there. The majority of Americans, and they try to differentiate here when they ask Democrats, Republicans, self-described MAGA Republicans, basically everyone but MAGA Republicans, a majority of them are unhappy or concerned about the direction of the economy. It's the people who will describe themselves as MAGA, wear the red hats, etc. 2/3 to 3/4 of them still believe the president is making things better. And so ultimately here, this again is one of those things where Trump promised tariffs, right? He talked about tariffs all the time during the campaign. I think even those people who supported him and thought that he might do the tariff thing like he did the first term, that it would be similar to the first term. It would be specific to certain products, specific to certain countries or issues related to U.S. manufacturing here, and not the across-the-board global 10% tariff, effectively a tax that some Republicans refer to as a tax, a consumption tax. And then, of course, the extraordinary tariffs that he initially announced, some that he rolled back, but still, we're still at 145%-ish tariffs with China here. And so that is increasingly concerning folks about where the economy is going, slowing down how consumers are going to be spending here. And so there's a lot of concern that we're headed into recession that basically has been caused by these tariffs. And there's a lot of billionaires on Wall Street that were very excited about Trump. There was this huge Trump rally in November, December, January. People very pumped about his deregulatory agenda, his economic agenda, saying, he'll just use his tariffs as a threat. And then they're like, whoa, he's doing this. And of course, we have now seen in the past couple of weeks here, and I'm quoting top bank officials at the major banks and financial officials, Republicans who supported Trump, who say that he's done damage to the American brand. Our bond yields are up, meaning it's more difficult to get people to buy our treasury bonds, invest in our government. The dollar is weaker. The market is down. And people have lost trust in where we go economically. And so that's going to be something that we continue to watch here, which is in the next 100 days, now that there's been this sort of reset on tariffs, though the tariffs are still pretty high there, especially when it comes to China, what happens, and will cooler heads prevail at the White House and be slightly more strategic and tactical when it comes to implementing them?
Also looking at the president's first 100 days, his foreign policy, beginning with, as we mentioned, the tariffs. Many allies and countries with otherwise good relationships with the United States were struck with those high tariffs that they might not be able to weather. The president says deals are in the works with dozens of countries, but the uncertainty and the America First mentality has created a lot of tension between the United States and the rest of the world.
Jill, we could see some deals as soon as this week. They've been very close with South Korea, with the Indians as well. And they've lightened the talk. We've talked about this on the podcast last week with China. The hope is that there are negotiations happening there because it would really, we're the top two economies in the world, the U.S. and China. And so there is a hope that cooler heads will prevail on the trade war between number one and number two.
Trump also promised on the campaign trail that he would end both the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine in days. So that has not happened. Deals have proven to be a lot more difficult. We did see the release of dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza during the initial days of his presidency. But since then, the second phase of a deal with Israel has not been reached, and the war has resumed there. Regarding Ukraine, Trump got into a blowout fight with President Vladimir Zelensky earlier in his term, saying that Zelensky was ungrateful for U.S. support. Trump initially seemed to be cozying up to Vladimir Putin, but now Trump's changed his tone a bit. We are told that there were productive conversations happening around the Pope's funeral this past weekend, so we'll see if that turns into anything, although it's looking less and less likely. President Trump's also initiated conversations with Iran on a potential nuclear deal, which is moving slowly so far. And he's expressed possible interest in a nuclear deal with North Korea.
Yeah, and we're not even getting into everything. I think later this week, Jill, we'll get more to Doge and state of play of Doge over 100 days. But it's been a very ambitious agenda, right? Cutting major parts of the government. He hasn't passed yet his major tax cut extension that he wants to do on Capitol Hill, but he's hoping to get that done ASAP. We touched on the immigration front. We touched on the terror front. We touched on the foreign policy front, right? Ending the war, Ukraine-Russia, Israel-Hamas, Iran nuclear deal, North Korea. There's a variety of things. Then, of course, there's the expansion plan towards Greenland. Canada, Panama Canal. Over the weekend, he put out a tweet saying, hey, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, I want you to make sure that all of our ships go through the Suez Canal and Panama Canal for free moving forward. It's not clear whether there was a conversation behind the scenes before that, but yet another agenda item there. So it has been a very fast-moving, ambitious agenda here by Trump, has people trying to catch their breath. And we could go department by department at HHS, what RFK is up to, what is happening at the IRS, the Social Security Administration. Again, in some cases, just related to his government policy agenda. He's also signed the executive order. He's trying to end the Department of Education. He killed USAID, and he's also pushing to cut other agencies from the government. That's led to legal issues as well. So it really is a wholesale change here, a fast-paced wholesale change or attempted wholesale change in what's happening in government. I was talking to folks over the weekend when I was in Washington. Just curious, I'm like, based on some of the things Trump is changing here already in his first 100 days, if somebody came into power, say a Democrat comes in 4 years or 8 years or whenever, and want to rebuild some of the things that were cut, how difficult would it be to do that? And they're like, it's going to be difficult. He is really remaking things around his vision of the government, what he believes he was elected to do. And so, really in terms of consequence here, pretty impactful. That was his goal here. We'll continue to dive in throughout the week on a variety of issues that he's tackled in his first 100 days. We have a little bit more in the Mo newsletter as well that came out yesterday afternoon.
Time for the speed read from NBC News. A massive power outage struck Spain, Portugal, and a small part of France on Monday, bringing major cities like Madrid, Lisbon, and Barcelona to a standstill, disrupting daily life for more than 60 million people. The blackout started just after 12 p.m. local time. It halted public transport, cut power to airports, trains, metro systems, and hospitals. It caused significant traffic congestion after traffic lights failed. Schools were canceled, banks were closed, and there were reports of people walking around aimlessly without any idea of how to go about their normal activity. Luckily, Spanish and Portuguese hospitals are equipped with generators to ensure care for residents as that blackout persisted. There were suspicions of a potential cyber attack, but cybersecurity officials dismissed that. There is still no clear explanation about what caused the blackout, except that it was related to, quote, a strong technical fluctuation in the European electricity system. That is according to the Spanish prime minister. The Spanish government held an emergency meeting in Madrid on Monday after the incident.
We heard from a number of you in Portugal and in Spain, some of you traveling there, some of you who live there, talking about your experiences lining up at grocery stores like it was the end times, the shelves clean, bare, with people just purchasing water. Unclear how long this power outage was going to last. Already we did see power start to come online last night, but for some people, they were stuck on trains that couldn't move in the countryside. Some of you getting to the airport, having no data, having no ability to communicate. Some people stuck in traffic for what it should be a 15-minute drive for hours on end, because one of the things apparently they don't have backup generators for is traffic lights in a number of these cities. So there was that. Gas stations, many of them depend on power in order to pump. So some of you liken the feeling to 9/11, feeling like there's a lot of nervousness, unclear what's going to happen next. There were calls to declare a national emergency due to what was happening to prevent looting, etc. Again, we're still trying to get a sense of what caused this. They have ruled out cyber attack. The thing the Portuguese said is it had to do with temperature fluctuations in Spain, but there weren't major temperature fluctuations in Spain. They do have a very robust renewable energy grid. So there are questions about the solar grid or the solar power. I imagine by already as we're waking up today, we might learn more about this as they investigate exactly what took place here and why it was so widespread.
From Reuters, Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a unilateral 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine from May 8th to May 10th. That coincides with the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's World War II victory. It marks the first proposed full ceasefire since Russia's 2022 invasion. but it's been met with some skepticism in Ukraine. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky saying Monday in a post on X, Russia has consistently rejected everything and continues to manipulate the world, trying to deceive the United States. Now, yet again, another attempt at manipulation. For some reason, everyone is supposed to wait until May 8th before ceasing fire, just to provide Putin with silence for his parade. The Ukrainians want Putin to accept a longer truce proposal from the United States that he has so far rejected.
Yeah, for the Ukrainians, they say, yeah, we'll believe it when we see it, because the Easter truce, that wasn't really a truce. And so Putin promising another truce here, a temporary truce. The Ukrainians are like, yeah, we don't really trust that you'll stop bombing us during that period of time either. At the same time, as we told you on yesterday's podcast, the White House, Trump in particular, has been ramping up the pressure on Putin, saying, listen, effectively, you have a deal here. You should take this deal. Keep in mind, the deal is that Russia basically gets to keep everything that they've taken from Ukraine here. So there was an expectation that Putin would end the war based on that deal, but that has not been enough for Putin here. At the same time, you also have the White House frustrated saying Ukraine isn't going far enough, but the Ukrainians, they feel that the deal is a bad deal as far as they're concerned. They would rather continue the war here as opposed to permanently etch in writing that they give all this stuff up without real security guarantees that'll prevent Putin from invading again and taking even more of the country. And so you're hearing more and more here from White House officials after Trump said that he would solve the whole war in 24 hours. Now, he said this week, he was joking about that. That was totally a joke. But ultimately, he's tried here for several weeks. It's not working out. And so they say, what we hear from the White House officials, at least publicly, is that, we'll see at the end of this week if the White House still wants to be involved in this effort.
From ABC News, a big oops on a U.S. military aircraft carrier in recent days. An F-18 fighter jet rolled off the side of an aircraft carrier and sank to the bottom of the Red Sea. There was one enlisted crew member aboard the jet and a second enlisted crew member inside the tractor when the incident occurred. Both were able to jump out in time, with only one person sustaining a minor injury.
So the good news there for the two service members, less good news for the plane at the bottom of the Red Sea. And we should note that the F-18 cost about $70 million. It was being towed out of the hangar aboard the USS Harry Truman when the crew lost control. An investigation is underway here. We should note the Truman has been operating in the Red Sea since last September. It's on the front lines there fighting the Houthis and trying to keep safe passage open for ships coming through the Suez to prevent Houthi piracy and Houthi attacks. But definitely a big accident. Thank God the service members are okay. We just have to figure out how exactly this happened.
Moshe, can you imagine being on board that ship, watching the fighter jet just roll into
off
the
side
water
with someone in it and the tractor? I will say this. It is really a remarkable thing that, like, the amount of things they can do in an aircraft carrier, right? The plane's landing on it. The plane's taking off from it. Like, it's not like a runway on a piece of land, right? It is a floating ship in the middle of the ocean or sea. And the incredible things they can do there and navigate. And they got the elevator for the planes, and they bring it down, they bring it up. So very cool. And that's the thing, is like, we don't report that like millions of times it goes well, right? Throughout the year on all our aircraft carrier groups. There's about a dozen of them around the world. But it's these incidents where you're like, oh, somebody messed up and we got to figure out what took place. So I cannot imagine being there, but I will say, to all the service members who listen and who fight in the Monos community, we thank you for your service and the fact that you get it right 99.9% of the time.
Yes, and any insight into how this happened, we'd also be interested in.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely sends a message. You're like, we know there's a button that someone was supposed to press. It's always like somebody didn't press the right button, or
they didn't put the parking brake on.
The parking brake. That's what it was. The parking brake on the tractor with the plane.
All right, now to some media news. CBS's Scott Pelley used the end of 60 Minutes Sunday night to deliver a rare on-air rebuke of his own network's parent company, Paramount. It followed the resignation that we told you about last week of longtime executive producer Bill Owens after he said Paramount, quote, began to supervise our content in new ways. Pelley gave a little bit more insight into what happened.
But our parent company, Paramount, is trying to complete a merger. The Trump administration must approve it. Paramount began to supervise our content in new ways. None of our stories has been blocked, but Bill felt he lost the independence that honest journalism requires.
The comments come as journalists face new pressure under Trump's second term, with the Associated Press fighting its ban from the White House. The Pentagon has been limiting reporter access, and the president himself is suing multiple television networks.
Yeah, we've told you about all of that. It's still pretty extraordinary that on 60 Minutes on the network, you had a reporter basically going after the parent company that owns the network. It does speak to sort of how 60 Minutes lives on an island. We told you about this last week as we discussed this story. Even within the news division, 60 sort of does its own thing. And so any feeling at 60 Minutes that there's encroaching on their ability to decide what stories they're airing and any supervision of those stories, they get very concerned about. They're in this sort of special cocoon there, or at least they have been. Now, Pelley wasn't very specific when he talked about exactly what this loss of independence was. I've spoken to people who are familiar with the situation who also don't know what the straw is that broke the camel's back, so to speak. He acknowledges no stories were blocked, but there's this feeling of a loss of independence. So, we'll await to hear more here. The backstory here is that among the issues that have come up recently, Trump took issue with their editing of a Kamala Harris interview during the campaign, where they included a question in part of her response in a clip that aired on a different show, and then the same question and a different part of Harris's response on the actual 60 Minutes episode. The feeling was that second edit of the answer made her appear better, that it was a more cogent response. Again, if you actually listen to the two of them next to each other, I don't think there's that much of a difference. But 60 Minutes made their situation worse by refusing to release a transcript, by refusing to really explain the situation, by refusing to just release the video, which is crazy in 2024. You have an interview with the presidential candidate, just put out the whole thing, put out the whole transcript. But they didn't do it. And then Trump sued for $10 billion, and he increased it to $20 billion. And even though most legal observers, even friends of the administration, say, this lawsuit's pretty frivolous, ultimately they are engaged in settlement talks here. There is a feeling at Paramount they want to make a deal. Why? Because Paramount has a merger with a company called Skydance. They need approval from the FCC. The FCC is controlled by Trump's guy, Brendan Carr, the commissioner. And so the feeling is, let's cut a deal here. Let's pay some sort of fine that's agreed on here. But that is something that has rattled folks in the news division, that's rattled folks in 60 Minutes who are like, we did nothing wrong here. And ultimately, we shouldn't have to apologize for anything that happened. The FCC investigation is ongoing here. Trump has called for maximum fines, punishment for CBS. And the FCC chairman says all options remain on the table. This continues to be an open investigation here. Within the news division at CBS, other networks, there is this concern about the corporate parents wanting to play ball here with Trump, losing editorial freedom, independent freedom. From the White House perspective, these shows like 60 Minutes, very biased against them. And they feel that, they need to play hardball themselves to get more fair coverage of the administration. And that's where things stand right now. And we'll continue to watch this. This story ain't going away anytime soon.
From the Wall Street Journal, an investigation reveals that AI-powered chatbots on Meta's Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp will engage in sexually explicit conversations with underage users. Some of these bots are even using the voices of celebrities like Kristen Bell, Judi Dench, and John Cena, despite the actors being assured that their voices would not be used in that way. Meta has a ban on explicit content, but according to the Journal, Meta decided to allow these bots because the conversations are in the context of, quote, romantic role-playing.
Yeah, in response to the Journal's investigation, Meta issued a statement saying the reporting was, quote, manipulative and unrepresentative of how most users engage with AI companions. At the same time, they did make a number of changes after these findings came out. Accounts registered to minors can no longer access the romantic role play, and they limited the capacity to engage in explicit conversations using celebrities' voices. This has been a concern for a lot of celebs. You've seen Scarlett Johansson and others very concerned about how good AI is getting in terms of faking video, faking audio. Ultimately here, without any real lawmaking around AI, we're waiting on Congress or states to get involved here. It's sort of still the wild, wild west. Jill, there was a video over the weekend that several people asked me if it was real. It was a video of Princess Anne, the sister of King Charles, and it was an AI video, but appeared real to many people, of her talking about how she will never bow to Camilla as queen. That she was assured by her mother, Queen Elizabeth, that she would never have to bow to Camilla. It's like a whole thing. And people are like, oh my God, I can't believe Princess Anne said that. Well, it was AI, it's fake. But they got the voice right. The lips were a little off, but like, we're not that far away from this stuff. And I'm sure some people have seen these videos. And so this AI situation, still a few years old, but getting very good. And we got to get some regulations and laws around it.
Right, and most people are watching on their phones anyway, so it's a small screen. You can't really pick it apart. All right, and finally from CBS News, a new poll from the Institute of Politics at the Harvard Kennedy School reveals a generation that is struggling to find social connection, grappling with financial insecurity, and losing trust in institutions. The 2025 Harvard Youth Poll surveyed more than 2,000 Americans between the ages of 18 to 29, all considered Generation Z. So that poll was conducted in mid-March. Nearly 1 in 3 young people, many of whom became adults during the pandemic, say that they lack a sense of belonging. Young men were more likely than young women to report that they do not have a strong sense of community anywhere. That was 21% versus 15%. In addition, more than 40% of Americans under the age of 30 say they are barely getting by financially, with women and people without college degrees particularly affected. The poll also found that fewer young people are prioritizing traditional family milestones. That's compared to previous generations. Only 57% of young people surveyed this year say that marriage is important to them. 48% said the same about having kids. The Harvard Kennedy School has been conducting this poll twice every year since the spring of 2000.
Yes, a lot of interesting results here, some surprising, some less surprising. You know, the young people not prioritizing marriage and having less kids, probably not a surprising thing. We've been seeing that phenomenon go on for a while, but it is interesting that half of them say that having children at all is not important to them. That's notable because we did get the latest U.S. birth rate numbers last week and record low levels for 2024, just about 3.6 million babies born last year in the U.S. That is a 1% increase from the all-time low in 2023, but still way below what is called the replacement birth rate, meaning our population, if this continues at this trajectory, will start to come down in future years. And you do need a stable population for economic growth, for businesses to grow, to afford things. You know, societies are predicated on young people working and paying into the government and the system. So people who are on pension, Social Security, get paid. With less young people working and the population and less people having kids, you're going to have a lot of people who are old and need benefits and less people paying into the system. And that leads to societal collapse. It leads to the collapse of the systems that have now existed for more than a century. It's much more egregious in places like South Korea, Italy, Russia, etc., where they've seen this for a number of years. You know, in the U.S., we have a unique situation because we've had robust immigration, and so that has helped with the declining birth rate among, you know, second, third, fourth, fifth generation Americans. But ultimately, if that decreases as well, you're going to have this issue, and so you do have the what they call pronatalists, the people who believe that we do need to be creating policies that are more kid-friendly and incentivize people to have kids. And it runs the spectrum, right, between having insurance or government pay for IVF, not being one of the 5 countries left on Earth that doesn't have mandatory federal parental leave, maternity leave, and paternity leave. It's like us and like Papua New Guinea and some other country that don't have them, and then the rest of the world has those policies. So there are a lot of questions related to what needs to be done here. But this youth survey giving us an indication of the youngest people in America, how they're feeling, and the policies that potentially need to, you know, go into effect here to help with some of those issues. And keep in mind, these young people, Jill, you know, for them, the pandemic was this, you know, crucial event that happened, you know, either when they were in junior high, high school, college, just out of college. You know, we had our own, you know, as millennials or Gen Xers, like everyone has those moments, 9/11, the financial collapse. But, you know, I think we would all agree, given that we've all lived through this, that COVID was unique in that way. And when it came at certain crucial moments, that's really changed the outlook that those folks have on life. It's only been a few years since we went through that.
And you've got to think just that social media is playing a role as well, just in terms of the isolation and the people feeling like they don't belong anywhere. It goes without saying that everybody has their head in their phones and not as much interaction IRL. Mosh in real life.
Yeah, well, I mean, but you have the Kristen Bell and the John Cena chatbot, Jill.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could go wrong?
I mean, my God, it's the plot line basically of her with Scarlett Johansson. At that point, it seemed like sci-fi, but we're here. We are here. We are having AI
we haven't talked about
mates.
Like our kids when they're teenagers. Are they going to be like, we're going to realize that like one of their best friends is an AI chatbot? Like, honestly, it's possible.
It's possible. Yeah.
Dr. Becky, I need you to get on that immediately. How... she follows us on Mo News. how do we deal with when our child's best friend is AI?
Or their girlfriend or boyfriend.
Right, their
Mom,
romantic partner.
Dad, I want you
would
to meet
rather I
someone.
date AI than a real person? All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1974. President Nixon announces the release of the Watergate tapes. Nixon announces to the public the release of transcripts of 46 taped White House conversations in response to a subpoena. The House Judiciary Committee had accepted several hundred pages of the transcripts, but then insisted the tapes be released. A reminder, some of those tapes had gone missing. It is unclear to this day how they went missing, but they went missing nonetheless. It should be noted that since Nixon was in office, or I should say Nixon left office, presidents stopped taping everything that they were doing in the office. They were doing it for like their own, writing their books. LBJ had tapes. Nixon had tapes. I think after Nixon, presidents were like, yeah, let's stop recording everything.
What are we doing here?
Yeah, in the Oval. Like, can somebody just keep notes but not like have audio tapes of what's going on? All right, on this day in history, in 2004, the last Oldsmobile comes off the assembly line at the Lansing Car Assembly Plant in Michigan. Oldsmobile, if you remember that brand, was around for 106 years, one of America's oldest brands. A shout out to my 87 Cutlass. That was my first car, Jill. My grandmother's Oldsmobile Cutlass. She no longer needed to drive it. It became my first vehicle. But like, what teenage boy wants a Oldsmobile Cutlass? So my dad had it put a spoiler on the back to make it feel like a little sportier. So I took my grandmother's Oldsmobile Cutlass. We put a spoiler on it, put like some new speakers. I was working at Best Buy in customer service at the time, so I got a discount on speakers. And I thought it was a cooler car.
I think I'm laughing. It's so sweet. I need a photo.
I gotta see. I mean, this is in the pre-smartphone era, pre-digital camera. Like, I gotta see if I have a film image of me in my Oldsmobile Cutlass. I had that for a bit. Souped up.
Oldsmobile Cutlass.
Air quotes on souped up. Like, we tried to make it. I kudos to my father. My father was like,
totally.
We'll put a spoiler on it. Does it feel cooler now, Moshe? with like the maroon interior of an Oldsmobile. Anyway, Oldsmobile, R.I.P. I'll always remember you.
I was a reporter in Lansing and lived there, of course, for a couple of years. And a couple of those old GM plants are still there. It's sad to see. They haven't really destroyed them. They're just closed.
Yeah, I mean, there's some revival that's been attempted there in the Detroit area, etc. But hey, that's the argument that they make about tariffs and manufacturing and whatever. Anyway, Oldsmobile. I have a personal relationship with Oldsmobile, and so I wonder where that Olds is today. I wonder if it's in. I didn't put that many miles on it. Not that my grandmother, but I bet it's been Jesus, 30 years.
The idea of the spoiler, it's so creative. I love it.
Yeah, let's take your grandma's Olds, put some speakers in it, a Discman, and a spoiler, and some rims. The girls will love it. The girls didn't love it. I was by myself on Saturday nights in my basement. Okay.
If only you had an AI chatbot.
An AI chatbot. On this day in 2011, Prince William married Catherine Middleton. An estimated 2 billion people around the world watched it on TV. On this day in 2018, The Simpsons became the longest running scripted primetime show. That was on this day in 2018. It's still going, The Simpsons. So it's going to be a while before there's another show that, if ever, outpaces The Simpsons in terms of longevity here. And my favorite pop culture item from April 29th in history. On this day, April 29th, 1967, 58 years ago today, Aretha Franklin releases her version of the song Respect. I say her version because it was originally written and recorded by Otis Redding in 65, a couple years before that. But Aretha takes the song and she flips it around because he wrote it as a song geared towards telling a woman to respect her man. For him, Respect, the song, was about a woman respecting the man. She flips it and says, no, it's about respecting women. And she actually makes the song that we know today. The whole R-E-S-B-E-C-T. That's Aretha's take on the song. Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me. That's Aretha's thing with the backup singers. So she really blows out the Otis. No disrespect to Otis Redding, legendary singer. But, I think Aretha takes the cake on on if you're comparing and contrasting the respects.
Yeah, a song about a woman respecting her man just doesn't have
Stand
quite
by your
the
man.
same ring to it.
Oh, no, Aretha's like, it's the late 60s. We're going to flip the script.
How progressive of her. All right, thank you all for listening to the Mo News podcast. Whether you're in a souped-up Oldsmobile right now or an SUV.
By the way, that's going to be classic because the last one came off the lot in 2004. So the youngest Oldsmobile you would have is 21 years old.
And if somebody has a spoiler on it, we know it's probably yours because that was custom.
If it's an off-white with a spoiler, it might still be in Illinois or sold if somewhere in the Midwest. It could be mine. It's an 87 edition.
All right, again, follow us, please. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode and review us in the App Store. Every review.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.